Thank you for making space for this conversation. In a world that rarely stops moving, choosing to pause may be one of the most courageous things we ever do. So, wherever this finds you, whether you're driving home, walking before the rest of the world wakes up, sitting quietly with a cup of coffee, or simply searching for a few moments that belong only to you, I'm grateful you're here. Let's begin. When was the last time you spent an hour alone with yourself, without reaching for your phone, without thinking about work, without planning tomorrow, without solving someone else's problem, without trying to become a better version of yourself? Just you. If that question feels strangely difficult to answer, I think you already understand why you're here. Somewhere in the world today, someone will receive a promotion they've worked years to earn. Someone will sign the biggest contract of their career. Someone will stand on a stage to applause. Someone will finally buy the house they've dreamed about. Someone will accomplish something they once believed was impossible. And later tonight, that same person may find themselves sitting quietly in a parked car, standing alone in front of a bathroom mirror, or lying awake beside someone they love, asking a question they never imagined they would ask. Why doesn't this feel the way I thought it would? Not because they aren't grateful, not because they aren't successful, not because they have failed, because somewhere along the journey, they became incredibly good at building a remarkable life while quietly losing touch with the person who was living it. Read that sentence again in your own heart. They became incredibly good at building a remarkable life while quietly losing touch with the person who was living it. I don't think that's burnout. I think it's something much quieter, something that often happens to the very people others admire most: the dependable ones, the responsible ones, the leaders, the caregivers, the builders, the people everyone else leans on, people who become so capable that the world gradually stops asking how they're doing, and sometimes they stop asking themselves. For more than 25 years, I've had the privilege of sitting with extraordinary people, executives leading organizations through immense change, physicians carrying impossible decisions, entrepreneurs risking everything to build something meaningful, leaders whose calendars were full, whose responsibilities were immense, and whose lives looked remarkably successful from the outside. I loved that work. I still do. I believe leadership matters. I believe organizations matter. I believe meaningful work matters. But over the years, I noticed something I couldn't explain. The conversations that stayed with me never happened in the boardroom. They happened after everyone else had gone home. The meeting was over. The presentation had ended. The decisions had been made. Someone would quietly close the conference room door, sit across from me, take a deep breath, and say, "Can I tell you what's really going on?" Those moments changed me because almost every time the conversation became less about business and more about being human. Different people, different industries, different stories, yet eventually they all arrived at nearly the same place. Sometimes they said, I don't know why I don't feel happier. Sometimes I've accomplished everything I thought I wanted. Sometimes I'm so tired and I don't think it's just the work anymore. And once, a leader that I deeply respected looked across the table at me and quietly asked, Elisa, when did I stop feeling like myself? I've never forgotten that question because after that day, I began hearing it everywhere. Not always in those exact words, but always with the same quiet ache. For years, I searched for language that had honored what these remarkable people were trying to describe, not to create another label and not to invent another diagnosis, simply to name a deeply human experience that I believe deserved to be seen. At the Flamekeeper Institute, we've come to describe that experience with a phrase that has shaped much of our work: identity exhaustion. Not as a medical diagnosis and not as a psychological condition, but as our language for something that we've observed again and again. The quiet distance that can grow between the life that you're successfully managing and the person you know yourself to be. That observation changed my life because it led me to a question I've been asking ever since. What if the greatest cost of pressure isn't that it makes us tired? What if the greatest cost is that it quietly teaches us to confuse our roles with ourselves? If that's true, then perhaps the deepest work of a human life isn't becoming someone new. Perhaps it's remembering the person pressure quietly asked us to forget. Welcome to the Pressure Room. I'm Elisa Verhill. This is where we investigate the invisible cost of pressure and explore what it means to remain fully human while carrying extraordinary responsible. This is where we investigate the invisible cost of pressure and explore what it means to remain fully human while carrying extraordinary responsibility. I'm grateful you're here. Let's begin. I wonder, what if we'd been asking ourselves the wrong question? For years, I've heard people ask, how do I get my life back? How do I find balance? How do I stop feeling so exhausted? Those are important questions, but over time, I found myself asking a different one. Not, how did you become so tired, but who did you have to become to carry everything you've been carrying? Because pressure doesn't only ask us to do more. Pressure quietly invites us to become someone, the dependable one, the strong one, the one who never needs help, the one who always says yes, the one who holds everything together, the one everyone can count on. At first, those identities feel like strengths, and in many ways, they are. The world rewards them. Organizations promote them. Families depend on them. Communities admire them. There's nothing inherently wrong with becoming capable. Capability is a beautiful thing, The question is different. The question is, what happens when capability becomes the only place that we know how to live? I don't think anyone wakes up one morning and decides, today I'm going to lose myself. I don't think it happens that way. I think it happens the way rivers shape stone, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, one reasonable decision at a time. I'll stay late today. I'll rest next weekend. They need me. I don't want to let anyone down. I can carry a little more. I'll come back to myself after this season. Every one of those decisions makes sense. Every one. That's what makes this so difficult to see. Every one of those decisions makes sense. Every one. That's what makes this so difficult to see. No single decision changes your life, but thousands of them, without reflection, begin changing the person who is living it. At the Flamekeeper Institute, we've come to return to one observation again and again. Not because it's dramatic, because it's true. Flamekeeper principle number 1 is that we do not lose ourselves all at once. We trade ourselves away through remarkably reasonable decisions. Hear that slowly and repeat that in your mind, because I don't think the important word is lose. I think it's reasonable. No one intended to disappear. They intended to provide, to protect, to lead, to love, to build something meaningful, to make life better for the people that they cared about. Those are beautiful intentions, but beautiful intentions without regular reflection can quietly become beautiful prisons. One of the things I've noticed over the years is that every identity solves a problem. Think about that for a moment. Every identity solves a problem. The perfectionist often learned that getting everything right reduced criticism. The caretaker discovered that taking care of everyone else created belonging. The achiever learned that accomplishment brought security. The strong one realized that if they held everything together, no one else would have to worry. Now, these identities didn't appear out of nowhere. They were intelligent adaptations. They helped us survive. They helped us succeed. They helped us become who we needed to be for a season. And I think it's important to say this. There's nothing shameful about adapting. Adaptation is one of the most remarkable things that human beings do. The problem isn't that we adapted. The problem is that many of us never realized we were still living inside an adaptation long after the season that created it had passed. A child learns to become perfect because perfection feels safe. An adult continues chasing perfection without realizing they're still trying to solve yesterday's problem. A young leader learns that saying yes creates opportunity. Years later, they no longer know how to say no, even when every part of them is asking for rest. The adaptation became an identity, and identities are incredibly difficult to question because after enough years, they no longer feel like choices. They feel like us. This is why I believe one of the most compassionate questions we can ever ask ourselves isn't, "What's wrong with me?" It's, "What was this version of me trying to protect?" That question changes everything. because it replaces judgment with curiosity. It replaces shame with understanding. It replaces self-criticism with compassion. And I've never seen lasting change begin with shame, but I have seen remarkable transformation begin the moment someone finally understands why they became the person they became. Maybe, just maybe, you don't need to fight the version of yourself that got you here. Maybe you simply need to thank them. They carried you through seasons they never imagined you'd survive. Honor them, learn from them, and then gently ask, do I still need to live this way? Because every meaningful return begins there, not with judgment, with compassion. And I think compassion may be the first step home. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you into something that will become part of every conversation that we have together. We call it the mirror moment. This isn't a place for fixing. It isn't a place for performing. It isn't even a place for finding answers. It is simply a place for seeing. Because I've come to believe that awareness is one of the most courageous acts a human being can practice. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. If you're walking, keep walking. If you're sitting quietly, allow your shoulders to soften. Take one slow breath. There is nothing you need to accomplish for the next few minutes. Only notice. Imagine that tomorrow morning, every title you've ever carried quietly disappears, just for one day. No one knows what you do. No one knows where you work. No one knows what you've accomplished. No one knows your salary, your education, your reputation, your successes, your failures. None of it. You are simply you. You're sitting on a weathered wooden bench in a quiet park. A gentle breeze moves through the trees. Somewhere nearby, children are laughing. An older couple walks slowly past, holding hands. The world continues without asking anything of you. A stranger sits beside you. They smile. After a comfortable silence, they ask one simple question. Tell me about yourself. How would you answer? Not what you do, not what you've built, not what you've achieved. You. What would you tell them? Not what you've achieved. You. Would you tell them what still fills you with wonder? Would you tell them what makes you laugh until you lose track of time? Would you tell them about the people who shaped your life? The books that changed you? The dream you've quietly carried for years but haven't spoken aloud? Would you tell them what breaks your heart? Or would you instinctively begin rebuilding your resume? There's no right answer, only an honest one, because I think many of us have spent so long introducing our usefulness that we've forgotten how to introduce our humanity. And perhaps that isn't your fault. Perhaps that's simply the language the world has taught us to speak. But today, for just these few minutes, I'd like to invite you to remember another language. The language of being. I'd like to ask you one final question. This question has quietly followed me for years. It has become one of the questions that guides my own life. What have you managed to keep alive inside yourself? Not what you've accumulated and not what you have accomplished. Not what have you proven. What have you protected? Can you still become completely absorbed in a conversation? Can you still notice the way the evening light falls across a room? Can you still laugh until your stomach hurts? Can you still change your mind? Can you still apologize? Can you still cry? Can you still rest without believing you must earn it? Can you still wonder? These aren't questions about success. They're questions about aliveness. Because over the years, I've met people with extraordinary careers who quietly confessed they no longer knew what brought them joy. And I've met people with very little by society's standards whose presence filled every room with life. They taught me something I'll never forget. Achievement and aliveness are not the same thing. One can be measured, the other can only be experienced. Perhaps that's why I believe so deeply in remembrance. Not because I think we need to become someone different, but because I think many of us are homesick. Not for a place, for ourselves, for the version of us that laughed more easily, that noticed sunsets without reaching for a camera, that climbed trees, that believed almost anything was possible, that knew their worth before the world taught them to measure it. Maybe, just maybe, that person isn't gone. Maybe they've simply been waiting patiently beneath years of responsibility, waiting for you to remember the way home. So this week, carry only one question. What have I managed to keep alive inside myself? Don't rush to answer it. Simply let it walk beside you. Notice what it awakens. Notice what it remembers. Because sometimes the questions that change our lives are not the ones we answer. They are the ones that quietly begin answering us. And before we leave this moment together, I'd like to offer you something. Not advice, not another challenge, simply a blessing. May you be gentle with the person you've had to become. May you honor the strength that carried you through seasons no one else fully understood. May you release the belief that your worth has ever depended upon how useful you are. May you rediscover your capacity for wonder. May you protect what is still beautifully alive within you. And when the world becomes loud again, as it surely will, may you remember that beneath every role, every expectation, every accomplishment, there is still someone waiting to be known, someone worthy of your attention, someone worthy of your compassion, someone worthy of coming home to. Thank you for meeting yourself here today. There's something I want you to hear, especially if today's conversation has felt uncomfortably familiar. If somewhere during the last few minutes you recognized yourself, please don't mistake recognition for failure. Recognition is not the end of the story. Recognition is the beginning of freedom, because we cannot return to a place we refuse to acknowledge we've left. For a long time, I believed growth meant becoming someone new, a better leader, a better executive, a better coach, a better parent, a better version of myself. Like so many of us, I was always reaching toward another version of more capable, more disciplined, more accomplished, more prepared, more successful. And while there's nothing wrong with pursuing excellence, I eventually realized something that quietly changed my life. The people who inspired me most weren't trying to become someone else. They were becoming more fully themselves. There was a steadiness about them, a calmness, a congruence. Their public life and their private life felt connected. They didn't seem to spend enormous energy protecting an image. They simply showed up whole. Not perfect, whole. That observation changed the question I was asking. Instead of asking, how do I become more? I began asking, what have I forgotten? What parts of me have been buried beneath responsibility? What parts of me have become so quiet I no longer hear them? What joy have I postponed? What wonder have I neglected? What truth have I ignored because everyone else needed something from me? Those questions eventually led me to one simple realization. I no longer believe the deepest work of a human life is becoming. I believe the deepest work is remembering. Remembering the values that mattered before pressure became so loud. Remembering the dreams that existed before fear became so convincing. Remembering the integrity that doesn't depend on applause. Remembering the humanity beneath every role we've ever carried. That is why we call this the philosophy of remembrance. Because remembrance assumes something profoundly hopeful. It assumes your truest self has not disappeared. It assumes that beneath every demanding season, beneath every disappointment, beneath every title, beneath every expectation, the flame is still there. Perhaps quieter than it once was. Perhaps covered by years of responsibility, but still there, waiting, not to be created, to be uncovered. People sometimes ask me why I chose the image of a flame. It's a beautiful question, not because fire is dramatic, but because throughout history, whenever people gathered around a fire, something remarkable happened. Stories were told, wisdom was shared, grief was witnessed, children learned from elders, strangers became friends, hope was renewed. Around the fire, people remembered they belonged to one another, and someone always tended the flame, not because they wanted recognition, because everyone understood what would happen if the fire went out. I've often wondered if perhaps the most important flame we're ever asked to tend isn't outside us, it's within us. Our integrity, our compassion, our curiosity, our courage, our capacity for wonder, our ability to love without losing ourselves. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we're tending that flame or allowing it to become hidden beneath ash. And here's what I want you to remember. Ash is not the absence of fire. Ash is often evidence that a fire has been burning for a very long time. If you feel weary, Perhaps it isn't because your flame has disappeared. Perhaps it's because you've spent years keeping everyone else warm. What if you stopped measuring your life only by what you've accomplished and began measuring it by what you've protected? Have you protected your integrity, your marriage, your friendships, your laughter, your health, your curiosity, your capacity to notice beauty? Because in the end, those are not distractions from a meaningful life. They are the very things that make a meaningful life possible. They are the very things that make a meaningful life possible. I don't know where today's conversation finds you. Maybe you're entering one of the most exciting seasons of your life. Maybe you're carrying more than you've told anyone. Maybe you're sitting in your driveway right now, wondering why this conversation feels so personal. Wherever you are, I want to leave you with this. You're not behind. You are not broken. You do not need to earn your humanity. And you do not need to become someone worthy of love, belonging, or peace. You may simply need to remember what has always been true. Pressure is inevitable. Losing yourself inside it is not. That is the journey we'll take together. One conversation, one question, one act of remembrance at a time. And if you allow me, I'd be honored to walk beside you. If today's conversation stirred something inside you, don't rush past it. You don't have to figure everything out today. In fact, I hope you don't. Some questions deserve more than quick answers. They deserve our attention, our patience, our honesty. If there's one thing I hope you'll carry with you after today, it isn't a strategy. It isn't a framework. It isn't even a conclusion. It's a question. What have I managed to keep alive inside myself? Take that question with you this week. Notice when it quietly appears. While you're driving, walking, sitting in a meeting, watching the sunset, tucking your children into bed, standing in the grocery store, living your ordinary life. Don't force an answer. Simply notice. Sometimes the questions that change our lives arrive long before the answers do. Every week I write something called the Flamekeeper Chronicles. People often call it a newsletter. I've never thought of it that way. To me, it's a letter, a quiet conversation that continues after the microphone has been turned off. Each week I'll share observations, stories, questions worth living with, ideas that didn't make it into the podcast, reflections from my own journey, and gentle reminders of what is worth protecting in a world that constantly competes for our attention. If today's conversation resonated with you, I would love for you to join us here. Not because you need another email in your inbox, but because all of us need someone every now and then to remind us what matters most. You'll find it at theflamekeeperinstitute.com. I hope you'll join us. Before we leave each other, I'd like to offer you a blessing. Not because blessings solve problems, but because they help us remember what deserves our attention. May you be gentle with the person you've had to become. May you honor the strength that carried you through seasons no one else fully understood. May you release the quiet belief that your worth has ever depended upon how much you accomplish, how useful you are, or how perfectly you hold everything together. May you rediscover your capacity for wonder. May you protect your curiosity. May you laugh more often than you think you should. May you notice beauty before urgency. May you choose presence over performance whenever you can. May you have the courage to tell the truth, especially to yourself. And when life inevitably becomes demanding, when responsibilities multiply, when the noise of the world grows louder than your own inner voice, may you remember that beneath every role, every title, every expectation, and every accomplishment, there is still someone worthy of your kindness, someone worthy of your attention, someone worthy of coming home to. That someone is you. We live in a world that teaches us to become more accomplished, more productive, more impressive, more efficient. We choose another path. We choose to remember. To remember that success without humanity is incomplete. To remember that pressure is inevitable, but forgetting ourselves inside it is not. To remember that every human being carries a flame worthy of protection. To remember that leadership begins with self-awareness and grows through compassion. To remember that wonder is not childish. It is wisdom that has remained awake. To remember that our greatest legacy will never be measured only by what we built, but by who we became while building it. If these words have stirred something you haven't felt in a long time, perhaps this isn't the end of a podcast. Perhaps it's the beginning of a return. Welcome to the Pressure Room. Welcome to the philosophy of remembrance. Until we meet again, keep tending the flame, because the flame remembers even when we forget. I'm Elisa Verhill. Thank you for making space for this conversation. Until next time, protect the flame.